We do not rule, but we may guide the men that do. Gently.
Hey guys, Pete here. Today I'll be talking about House of the Dragon Episode 9. The one where we see what happens when the piece that was holding everything together is taken out of the puzzle. King Viserys the Peaceful is dead, and Episode 8 did a great job of previewing what's to come by showing that as soon as he left that fateful family dinner, much of the goodwill he brought with him gave way to mounting tensions between the two different factions that exist in his own house. His presence and his words moved Rhaenyra and Alicent towards reconciliation. It did seem like they might work out their differences, but things fall apart before that could ever be realized. It turns out that a provoked grandson punching an uncle in the face is only the tip of this iceberg. And in Episode 9, we see how things proceed now that the king is dead. I really like the opening sequence where we see the places where power resides when no one's around. A collection of empty halls and a quiet room with a vacant throne. Left alone, they're only remarkable because we know what they represent. This evokes the idea that left by itself, this foreboding object fashioned from the weapons of conquered foes is just a chair. At the same time, the king's glorious walk to reclaim it illustrated the power and authority that can't be separated from it. This exists in his absence, and we know that in his failing health, he had to relegate that to people he trusted. That proximity gives them tremendous influence over the succession, and in Season 1's penultimate episode, we get to see how they use it. It starts with an unnamed boy who takes word of the king's passing to Talia. She takes the news to Alicent, who tells her handmaiden not to tell anyone else. Based on the late night complication that she now thinks her husband changed his mind about his heir, she instinctively wants to buy time to figure out how to proceed. As things progress, we'll see them confine everyone who knows about this to the castle so that they can manage how the news gets out. She tells her father about Viserys' change of heart, and it's here where the show starts to paint its own picture of how they react. In the book's telling, you're led to believe that the Hightowers had been expecting this death, and that they were just waiting to usurp the throne for Aegon as soon as that happened. Here we see that Alicent's role is a lot more complicated, and that she did misinterpret what he was saying on his deathbed. She believes it was a dying wish from a husband who had changed his mind. As they convene the small council, Tywin Lannister reveals that they had long laid plans to make Aegon king either way. So his last-minute revelation serves to give them the cover they were looking for. This is something that they were going to do either way, and now Otto is ready to put their plans in motion. He lays out some of their steps. They have to replace some of the gold cloaks because they're still loyal to Daemon. Remember, he was in charge of the City Watch and was very popular with his men. Tywin says the royal treasury will be split up to protect it from falling into Rhaenyra's hands if it comes to that. As they start to discuss who their allies are, Alicent snaps out of her grief long enough to express her surprise that this had been going on behind her back. She doesn't appear to have a clue how ready they were, even though this is something her father's been telling her since Aegon was born. And when she says, "You were all planning to install my son as king without me," Ironrod tells her that there was no reason to sully her with darkling schemes. And this is a nice setup for what Rhaenys will tell her later when they speak. Master of Coin Lyman Beesbury is having none of this. It's clear that he wasn't involved in the planning, and he does a pretty good job of explaining why it goes against everything Viserys wanted. While he's doing that, they make the choice of showing Alicent as she struggles to accept the reality of the situation. This is a fairly glorious speech from a character that has been with us from the beginning, but it's safe to say it's falling on deaf ears in this group. As he gets to the point where he questions if someone actually killed the king, everyone's favorite Criston Cole comes up behind him and smashes his face against the table. And I guess in some way this is the payoff for having these mostly useless little balls in front of them as they sit at this table, as his turns out to be the death of him. In response to the murder, Lord Commander Westerling draws his sword and demands Criston give him his cloak. There's a brief standoff that Alicent is able to defuse, and when Grand Maester Orwyle wants to have Beesbury's body removed, Otto says the door stays shut until they finish their business. Historically, this is known as the Green Council. That's where the episode gets its name. Tylan sits back down next to the corpse and mentions that Storm's End will be a problem. They can't count on Lord Boros Baratheon, but he does have 4 daughters that are unmarried, which brings to mind a marriage pact. The king is already married, but we haven't heard any word of a betrothal for Aemond, and we'll see in a bit that Aegon has a son of his own. Alicent interrupts again to ask about Rhaenyra. She's told that the former heir cannot remain free to draw support for her claim. When she asks if they plan to imprison her, she's told that she'll be given the chance to swear obeisance, but no one believes she'll bend the knee, or Daemon for that matter, and that leads Alicent to ask if they're planning on killing her, which based on the looks on everyone's faces, they absolutely are. Orwell tries to frame this in the best possible light. A living challenger invites battle and bloodshed. Otto says it's unsavory, but it is a necessary sacrifice. The queen is definitely not into this idea, and we see that when she unloads on Ironrod, but she doesn't have a plan for what they could do instead when she's pressed. To that, Otto just goes ahead and issues the order, and Westerling takes off his cloak and refuses. He says, "I answer to no one but the king, and until there is one, that he has no place there." Then they just let him walk out, and the camera focuses on Criston Cole as he considers his life choices, which he should, because this guy is terrible. This cuts to Alicent and Otto, who go looking for Aegon, and Helaena tells them that he's not in his room. You get the sense from her reaction that this is a pretty common thing. She's fine with sitting there and working on a needlepoint of a spider and having a conversation with her servant who was looking after her twins, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera. At least that's what they were named in the book. They don't really give us any confirmation of their names here. But based on the changes in the opening sequence, it doesn't look like they're rearranging anything here. And as far as we know, she has a daughter and a son at this point, which means that Aegon does have an heir. As Alicent is trying to tell her about her father's death, she repeats the line that there is a beast beneath the boards. I still hadn't come up with a guess that I loved for what this referred to, and I'd heard a lot of theories that all related to book spoilers that were promising, but I think they were actually going for what happens at the end of this episode, which I guess makes sense, but it's a little loose and not quite as exciting as what I was hoping for. Aemond comes in to join them, and Otto goes to meet with Aegon's sworn protector, Eric. This leads to a race to find Aegon, because as best I can tell, Alicent wants to be able to see him first so she can try to get him to agree not to kill Rhaenyra. The chase itself makes for a nice chance to look around King's Landing, and we do get a little bit of character development for Aemond, kind of how he sees his role as the second son, and that he thinks he would make a better king than his brother, which, to be fair, we learn as they're walking around is a pretty low bar. While that's taking place, we see that Rhaenys learns that she's been locked into her room, and that all the servants that know the king is dead are taken and put in a cell so the word about the king's death won't get out. Talia and the boy who found the king are among them, and Larys is there in his role as Lord Confessor. Otto gathers the lords on hand in the Red Keep to inform them that not only is the king dead, but that he amended his wishes. He tells them that they swore their banners to Rhaenyra, now they must pledge them to the future king. Most of them do this without a second thought, but there are some dissenters. Lady Fell speaks up, saying she won't renounce her oath to Rhaenyra, and there's another character who says he's not an oath breaker. I couldn't figure out what house he's supposed to be from. Otto won't let anyone leave before they've made their choice, and he has the ones who won't bend the knee arrested. Lord Caswell, who we've seen a couple of times now, is on the fence, but ultimately kneels. And we see that Larys is watching from the sidelines and takes note of that. The Cargill twins go into an establishment where they're forcing kids with filed down teeth to fight each other for entertainment. Sir Eric explains to his brother that the prince spends many a night there, and he sees it as evidence that he's an awful person that shouldn't be king. They also see one of his royal bastards sitting alone in the shadows, who could turn out to be important later. As they're talking about him being unfit to rule, they're approached by a woman who tells them that she can take them to someone who knows where Aegon is. There will be a price involved, and the person only wants to speak to the hand. Alicent is on hand as the Silent Sisters prepare Viserys' body to be burned. She puts his crown on his chest and cries over his body. He may not have been the husband that she dreamed of, but it is clear in this moment that she cared for him deeply. She then goes to meet with Rhaenys, which is probably the most gripping exchange in the episode. Alicent lays out all the heartache that has come on House Velaryon as a result of their loyalty to Rhaenyra and Daemon. She makes a decent case from her point of view. And the most notable thing she says is that as women they don't rule, but they can try to guide the men that do gently. I think this is the takeaway we're supposed to have about Alicent as a character at this point. If you think back to the Green Council, it wouldn't really make sense that she was surprised that they were thinking about putting Aegon on the throne. As I mentioned, this is something that Otto's been talking about since Aegon was born. And until Viserys' speech at dinner, this is something that she was actively trying to do. I think what the show is going for is that it's not that she doesn't want that to happen, even though she may have been wavering on her position after the rape incident in the last episode, but she wanted to do it without the violence. Her main issue here is not that he's going to be king, it's that Otto wants to kill Rhaenyra. The subtext for the conversation that she's having with Rhaenys, though, is that they need her dragon. And for this, she's willing to offer her Driftmark for her and her granddaughters to do with as they see fit. Rhaenys acknowledges that she's a little smarter than she thought she was, but crushes her justification by saying, "And yet you toil yourself in service to men, your father, your husband, your son. You desire not to be free, but to make a window in the wall of your prison. Have you never imagined yourself on the Iron Throne?" These are things that Alicent has no response for, and she leaves her there to think about her offer. Criston and Aemon see Otto meeting with Mysaria. She knows that the king is dead and reveals she's hidden Aegon away somewhere safe. She'll tell them where he is if they'll pay her and agree to stop the kid fights we saw happening in Flea Bottom. She directs them to the hiding place in the Sept, where Aegon makes it clear that he doesn't want to be found. When they take him outside, Cole and Aemon are there to try to intercept him. They want to take him to the queen. A fight breaks out, and Eric with an E, the one who's been making the case that this is not the person that he wants to see as king of the Seven Kingdoms, sort of sits it out, and then at the end we see him slip away. When Aemon gets a hold of Aegon, he asks him to let him go and says he'll disappear, and you see that Aemon understands that this could lead to him becoming the king instead. But Criston intervenes and takes him to his mother. And I didn't mention it earlier, but Aemon says he's next in line, which he should know isn't actually the case. If the firstborn were to die, then it would follow his line, and since he does have that heir I mentioned earlier, Jaehaerys would have a better claim than Aemon. I trust that the writers understand this, so I wonder what it is that they're trying to say about this character. Alicent does win the race to secure Aegon, and that means that she's in charge of putting together the Ascension. In defeat, Otto says, "Whatever our differences, our hearts remain as one." And Alicent quickly refutes this, saying, "I see now that I was just a piece you moved around the board." While this doesn't bode well for their relationship, after she declares that a reluctance to murder is not a weakness, she quickly pivots to laying out her plan for how things will go down. They'll send terms to Rhaenyra, true terms that she can accept. Aegon will be crowned by a Septon in the morning, wearing the crown of the Conqueror and carrying his sword Blackfire. They'll use every symbol they have at their disposal to help people remember the ancient strength of House Targaryen. They'll do it at the Dragon Pit, and everyone in King's Landing will have to be there to witness it. And this does show an understanding of what their advantage is, this proximity to the actual Iron Throne. If they can get him crowned in front of enough people, they can make them believe that he is the king. Otto still argues that if Rhaenyra is allowed to live, then people will put their banners behind her until she returns. And this is something that I'll come back to because I do think he's right to some extent, but I don't get why he thinks killing her would solve that problem. In not getting what he wants, it's clear that just like when she pulled the dagger on Rhaenyra, he's into seeing this side of his daughter, and even adds the comment that she resembles her mother in certain lights to drive that home. She returns to her room where she finds Larys waiting for her. He's found out something that she should know, and before you can even realize what's going on, they enter into this negotiation. He asks if she wondered how her father found Aegon first. To this, she sits down on the couch, and without anyone saying anything, she takes off her shoes and presents her feet for him to see. He explains to her that there is a web of spies in the castle, which he probably found out about when Talia was in the cells, and maybe more importantly, that her father knows about it. He pauses before he reveals more so that she can remove her stockings. Then he tells her about Talia, and lays out a plan that if he kills the leader, then Otto will lose his advantage. And of course, this is something that he can do if she wills him to. She then begrudgingly puts her feet up on the couch and turns away while he rubs one out. By the look on her face, we can see that this is not something she does for fun. This isn't sex play that they both take part in because they find it mutually satisfying. This is the price that she pays to get this information. It's a little on the nose, but I guess it makes some sense that given his condition, he might have a thing for healthy feet. But what stood out most to me about this was how routine it all seemed. This is definitely not the first time they've done it, and it's notable that she knows what she's asking him to do here and is willing to be complicit in murder because he suggested it, and it's not something that she wants to know more about. There's definitely been some evolution since the last time they had one of these kind of conversations. And while I do think that this is his thing, I think there is more to it based on the fact that she's such a powerful woman that he can make do this. Sir Eric, which I only know because I know which one ends up where in the book, busts into Princess Rhaenys' room to help her escape. He's decided that he can't get behind the crowning of Aegon and leads her out of the Red Keep. On the way out, they pass Lord Caswell's body. We saw him get caught on his way out earlier, and now he's hanging there as a deterrent to anyone else who might think about following Rhaenyra. We also see Mysaria's house burning down, and a man in a cloak walking away. You can't really see who this is, but I'm assuming this is one of his tongueless assassins because it lingered on his cane with the firefly, and when you look at this scene closely, you can see what looks like that same pin. Eric is trying to get Rhaenys to a boat on the river, and she's worried about leaving Meleys behind. As they're walking, they run into the crowds of people the city watch is herding towards the coronation. She gets caught in the crowd and has to move in the same direction. As Alicent is accompanying Aegon on the way to his coronation, he points out the obvious. His father never wanted him to be king. He didn't even really like him. He had 20 years to make that decision, and he stood by his choice of Rhaenyra. He laughs at the idea that with his final breath he changed his mind because, to be fair, it is kind of laughable. And to that, she offers him his namesake's dagger, and you can see the idea starting to set in for him. Rhaenys is relieved to realize that the crowd is being led to the dragon pit. When she makes her way inside, we hear Otto addressing the crowd. He tells them that Viserys the Peaceful is dead, and in his final moments he declared that his firstborn son Aegon should succeed him. The ceremony is put together really well, and the actor does a fantastic job in showing the range of emotions he experiences as he realizes that even though this is something that he didn't want, there are much worse things than being the king. When the crowd starts to cheer and he unsheathes his house's ancestral Valyrian steel blade, you can see that he's very much into it. Not that long ago, he woke up under a table in the Sept after a night out whoring, and now he's the most powerful man in the Seven Kingdoms. While this was all going on, Rhaenys had slipped away and reunited with her dragon Meleys. They burst out of the floor from the lower level and scatter the crowd, killing at least hundreds, maybe even thousands of them. She's right there in front of the usurpers. They have a stare down where Alicent puts herself in front of the king, and Rhaenys opts not to give the command Dracarys to burn them. Instead, she flies away, which is amazing looking, and the episode cuts to black. This was a strange episode, which in my mind is a step down from the last two in a lot of ways. But at the same time, some of the performances were so good that they overshadowed a lot of the problems I had. I still don't love that a misunderstanding pushed Alicent over the edge to get behind Aegon, but Olivia Cooke delivered so many great moments in the process of showing how that happened. The episode did work to make the character more sympathetic in the way that the previous two did for Rhaenyra, and I do think that will probably increase watchability as things develop. They did a good job of portraying Aegon as awful and unfit to rule while still giving us some insight into why he behaves the way he does. And as I've already mentioned, Tom Glencairn really showed up for the coronation scene. I also like how there doesn't seem to be that same love between him and Aemond as there was with Viserys and his brother, which is one of Daemon's only redeemable qualities. Aegon is a rough sell for everyone involved, including his mother, who has now committed her life to making sure that he remains in power. And I don't think that we're supposed to think that gently guiding him is what this situation calls for. I think whether you like this episode or not will come down to whether you like the closing set piece with Rhaenys and Meleys. And I think that's kind of a shame. I thought that it looked great, but it also felt like it only existed because they wanted to have something major happen in the closing scene of this penultimate episode. The conversation she had with Alicent was so good, and this didn't necessarily seem like it matched up with what they were saying. I suppose they were going for the idea that she doesn't want to escalate the situation. Like she has the power to wipe them out, which we know would save a lot of lives. And I know a lot of people are saying that she didn't want to be a kinslayer, but they're actively usurping the throne from your other kin. And she did kill quite a few of the small folk, which I know is completely consistent with the way the Targaryens think about them. But I feel like this is supposed to be this dramatic event where she turns the other cheek or whatever, and it just didn't really land for me. Also, Otto is awful, but he has been portrayed as smart and careful. In the book, he takes several days to methodically set up a situation that will make the Blacks look like the bad guys no matter how they respond to it. And here he just seemed like a garden variety bad guy. He mentions that her supporters will call their banners to get behind her, and that's the same reason why killing her doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah, there's no immediate heir there if they kill her and exterminate her whole family. But I don't think they set it up as a situation where he thought that he would be able to get away with that without any consequences. But hey, you know what? This is only one side of the story. So I do like that we didn't see the reaction yet, and some of this might make more sense when we see how that plays out. Stylistically, I thought it was a great looking episode. I thought the score added a lot to some of the quiet scenes and some of the conversations. And overall, I think that it may not have been as good as what we've seen, but I'm not exactly worried. I'm still looking forward to see what happens next. And I think that's a great place to leave things. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this episode and how you feel going into the finale. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.